Hello, beautiful hearts. My name is Yvonne Wildheart, and today is the 8th of February 2020. I come from Georgia, Woodurong Country in Central Highlands, Victoria, Australia. I just wanted to give this little video to talk about Lammas and the musings of Lammas and what Lammas means, and also the grief that sits for me and what's arising around this time on the earth wheel. So just last week, well this week actually, was the 4th of February, was marked the halfway point between winter solstice, summer solstice, winter solstice, northern hemisphere, southern summer solstice, which is the longest daylight hours in the point of the wheel, which was on the 21st of December, and autumn equinox. So it's a halfway point that marks that threshold of the cross quarter moving into the darkness. So autumn equinox, or Mabon, which is a pagan term, which is on the 21st of March. So we're halfway between. But Lammas is a point in the wheel which symbolizes the first of the three harvest points in the wheel. So Lammas being the first one, autumn equinox the second, and our third, which is Samhain or Halloween, which is in the southern hemisphere, is on the second, astronomically usually around the 8th of May. So, and it is our descent into the darkness. So we've just, as soon as we click over on summer solstice, a minute past the point of even the second of summer solstice, we are on the descent into the darkness. So we can tell now that the daylight hours are getting shorter, the sun is setting, or the earth is setting earlier, and you're waking up in the morning and it's a bit darker than it was a couple of weeks ago. So there is a clear evidence of that. We are also harvesting a lot of our vegetables, our summer crops that we planted in spring, and starting to harvest fruits of the trees. Well, we have been for a little while, but it's now turning into the apples and the pears and things like that. So it's all about picking fruit and harvesting, and also around where we live, there's a lot of wheat crops and things like that which have been harvested. So it's all full harvest point, the first harvest, which, is also the first point of death. So it's the first, Lammas is the first, it's not only the harvest, but it is the death. And we are seeing, as we pick the fruit, to eat, or the vegetables to eat, we are killing it, and we are not letting it go through its full cycle of, that starting to rot, or to flower, to seed, to rot and to decay and to become compost in the ground. Instead, we pick it early and we eat it in our bellies. And it composts in a different way, but not its full cycle. So Lammas is also about the early death, and we done a little group that I connect with, or together, a little group of witches in my local community. We done a ritual, one of Jane Meredith. So if you haven't read one of Jane Meredith's books, I suggest you go and have a look. She's an Australian author, and she writes a lot about the pagan traditions. And so Jane Meredith's ritual about, we enacted an emergency where everybody was given a piece of paper, and it either said, "You're alive," or "Dead, lie down." And so half of us were dead and half of us were alive, and that included children. So we had a lot of children in there. Most of us were parents, so we had, parents and children, and people lying on the ground. And it was really interesting to sit in that space, to think, death comes to us all, and sometimes much earlier than we anticipated. And so what's arising for me, so as it happens to be that today, the 8th of February, marks my little sister, who would have been 38 today, her birthday, and she took her own life in May 2nd, 2016. And so I wanted to speak to the grief that starts to creep in this time, and especially if you've lost people who haven't lived to old age, and around me there is lots of people who are ill at the moment, and a lot of people who are really, really sick, and who, may not have long to live. So, just feeling that the grief rise up, and it's interesting, when grief rises, and especially for people who have been, who have died, a little while ago. I'm just thinking of my sister Colleen, and she's now been dead for 4 years, or coming up 4 years. And although the grief is not as intense, it feels deeper, and it's not as visible. And so, we know when someone dies, there's a lot of people around to offer support, hopefully, mostly, that occurs. And it's it's a very public thing, or, people are struck by the grief, even, and as time goes on, that grief is still there for the people who are feeling it, but it's mostly unspoken. And I just wanted to talk to that, and to feel that, sit there. And it's really interesting to know that when we do sit in grief, but when we look around, the trees are still going through their cycle, and the birds are still chirping, and the world continues on, even though we sit in this place of grief, which is something that it's like a despair or a loss or longing. But there's nothing you can do about it. It's just there. It's not like you can change things, or it's something that, we just have to acknowledge and love and nurture, and know that when we are in these spaces of grief and sadness, that, if we have the capacity to just, to really nurture ourselves, feels like something that I probably need to do right now. But I didn't know that I needed to do it until I caught it, but I'd been sitting in it all day, and probably for weeks actually, in the lead up to this point. And there's lots of other things going on in my life that feels quite griefy and ending stuff, but again, that call for nurturing and just holding myself like a mother would hold a child through, those points in moment in life that you just go, well, life does go on. It really does. The children keep growing older, and I keep looking at my face, and I keep growing older, and things are changing and moving always, and nothing ever stands still, ever. Everything keeps moving. And to know that, I guess, when we're in grief, that just this too shall pass, and what can we do in the meantime to support ourselves? The things I do would be to sit on the earth. I think that's one of my favourite things to do when I'm in these spaces, and just be still and just feel the breeze and feel the earth underneath me, and just allow the grief to come up, because I know, and what I've tried to do in the past is just to bury it and push on, and how it comes out is very toxic, and I tend to project, and so I guess that's my Lammas musings of grief. And as we move into the descent, and feeling that, it's coming, the darkness is coming, and what do we need to do now? And this early point, still the first harvest, we've still got 2 more to go. It's 12 weeks between now and sowing. So, what do I need to do? So it's a good time to think about the nourishment that needs to happen now before we hit those points, because I feel if I don't do those things to nourish myself now, it will just keep getting worse, and by the time I get to May, I don't know what state I would be in if I didn't, take action now. So I guess Lammas, early grief, nourishment, harvest, and just, there's a stillness that comes as with the descent and as we move in the descent as well. Thank you for listening. So much love to you. And if this resonates or if you make any comments, please do. I'd love to hear from you and your experiences with this time of year, and what's arising for you. All my love. Thank you for listening.